It's 2002. A Canadian soldier is fighting for his life somewhere in the Middle East. Bullets are barely missing his head. Body parts are flying around like pieces of confetti. He is just seconds away from potentially entering the afterlife when he has one clear, sudden realization. Video games are bullshit. If I asked you to think of a shooter game, your mind would probably go to the most obvious. Call of Duty, Battlefield, maybe Counter-Strike or Fortnite. That soldier at the beginning named Andrew Spearin felt something crucial was missing in the depiction of war he found in games such as Medal of Honor, Counter-Strike, and Ghost Recon. Even games that were supposedly realistic, games that allowed you to play real historical battles with actual weapons that existed, did a poor job of capturing the entire scope of combat. They give you an exaggerated, entertaining versions of these events, just like I did at the beginning of this video. Most games by design, they put you at the center. You're the main character, sometimes a one-man army, or the last hope to win the war. You're him. But on a real battlefield, unless you're a coveted member of Delta Force, you're not Jason Bourne. You're just another soldier, another target. Spearin wanted a game that made you feel that fear, that realization that one wrong step, one wrong turn could be the difference between life and death. So he began working on that game. He would call it Modern Warfare. Epic Games, known for actually making games back then, had just released Unreal Tournament 2003, a first-person shooter mostly known for its multiplayer. With that release came an influx of modders looking to use their engine, the Unreal Engine, to help make their own unique mods. Among them was a team led by a 16-year-old named Jeremy Bloom. Bloom and his team were looking to create a more realistic but still visually appealing World War II shooter on the Unreal Engine. They called this project Red Orchestra. We plan on making Red Orchestra based off of team play, instead of how many times a player got killed or died. In a real battle, you don't touch a flag and magically control an area. And to help differentiate the game from the long list of other World War II shooters, the setting itself was going to be somewhere that was relatively unexplored. Western Europe had been beat to death. Even the Pacific Theater has been done. The war on the Eastern Front is almost a forgotten part of history. After the mod was released, it quickly grew a large fan base, and it kept growing after every update. By December 2003, the Red Orchestra mod was so popular, it even got Jeremy a quote in the New York Times, and would eventually take Epic Games' Make Something Unreal contest's grand prize in 2004, where the developers, now known as Tripwire Interactive, beat out over 1,000 submissions to take home $50,000 and a license to use the engine for their own commercial game. But as this mod got more successful, and the team behind the mod started to pivot into a commercial space, Jeremy wasn't involved. While he was the original creator and basically built the team, he was still a teenager. He was planning on going to college and claims he was interested in doing something else, so he stepped away from the project. Rumors would later claim that he was forced out. In late 2004, Valve releases Half-Life 2, built on their new Source Engine. The Source Engine uses C++, which makes it especially mod-friendly and much more appealing to Bloom than Unreal Engine. He wanted to create a multiplayer shooter game that was realistic and focused on infantry combat like his previous Red Orchestra project, but this time in a more modern, contemporary setting. After all, the Iraq War was now heating up and World War II games were starting to become a little oversaturated. That's when he came across Andrew Spearin. Spearin was already working on this exact idea on Valve's Source Engine. So together they joined forces with a few other developers and began working on Modern Warfare, now renamed Insurgency. Most of the developers were either full-time college students or had day jobs that took up most of their time, so the progress of the mod was slow. Really slow. Initially conceived by Spearin in 2002, by 2005, EA had released Battlefield 2, a game set in a modern war using modern weapons. Next year, Battlefield 2 even had its own mod called Project Reality, a total conversion mod that transformed this game into a slower, more tactical experience focused on realism and squad coordination, which seemed to draw even more similarities to the promised Insurgency. Bohemia Interactive launched Arma, a spiritual successor to Operation Flashpoint, and the next year Call of Duty announced its own Modern Warfare game, all of which had fans questioning why they should wait for Insurgency over these more higher budget popular releases. But in the summer of 2007, after years in development hell, that question was finally answered. Insurgency, or Insurgency Modern Infantry Combat, bridged the gap between more arcadey, fast-paced shooters like Battlefield or Call of Duty, and the slower, more monotonous milsim games like Arma or Project Reality. The game was realistic, but not so realistic that it becomes a walking simulator. Due partly to the limitations within Valve's source engine, the maps were smaller, leading to intense, fast-paced firefights, but it was incredibly easy to die. There's no crosshair, there's no minimap, there's a minimal HUD, and instead of the typical respawn system that allows you to respawn immediately after death, or at a location after an arbitrary amount of time, Insurgency has you respawn in waves, along with your other fallen teammates. And probably, most importantly, it was objective-based. There's no free-for-all or team deathmatch, you need to play the fucking objective. Although during the development, there was little hype around this project, in part due to other games that seemed similar and the constant delays, the mod ended up receiving over 1 million downloads and won the 2007 Mod of the Year award, just beating out Project Reality. Everything seemed to be going pretty well for Insurgency, but at the end of the day it was just a source engine mod, a mod that made no money. So after the initial release of the beta, the team that put together this mod, including both Bloom and Spearin, took more backseat roles and allowed this mod to be taken over by newcomers. This would lead to some conflicts, mostly between the original founders and the new project lead, who went by the name of Dr. Spielman. Spielman actually worked at EA and worked on the Insurgency mod in his free time. He was planning on recoding this entire project on an updated source engine, which would take years of work, as well as pivoting the mod to compete with more arcadey games like EA's own Battlefield, something that might appeal to more players overall, but probably ostracize its current fan base and kind of undercut the entire goal of the project to begin with. Spearin even highlighted how out of touch Spielman appeared to be on a blog, pointing out that the only war game the new project lead claimed to play was Call of Duty, fundamentally very different than what Insurgency had been going for. This back and forth would continue for years across blogs and forums, with Spearin and Bloom attempting to take control of the mod back from Dr. Spielman, who was allegedly holding it hostage for $10,000. Arguments and unsubstantiated rumors spread across the player base, causing it to split and dwindle. Eventually, Dr. Spielman would abandon the development of the mod. The development for the Insurgency mod would be stopped altogether, and unfortunately, it just didn't have the staying power that mods such as Project Reality did and continue to have. It was just another mod that had a ton of potential, won some awards, but was killed off by a variety of bad decisions, and today, it's almost entirely forgotten about. But around 2010, Jeremy Bloom, who had just recently graduated from college, decides he wants to take another crack at it. He wants to make Insurgency more than just a mod. He wants to turn this idea into a full-fledged game. So he creates New World Interactive, and along with Andrew Spearin and a handful of other developers, begin working on Insurgency 2. But there's a problem. Making games is pretty expensive, and although Jeremy Bloom allegedly comes from money, they don't seem to have a lot. So in July of 2012, they try to secure funding by launching a Kickstarter campaign. Bloom and Spearin enlist content creators to help promote the game and explain that they don't want to reach out to a game publisher, one that might help fund the development of the game, because publishers are too controlling.
And the idea, with going with Kickstarter was that hopefully we'd be able to get this thing done without giving up too much, getting supported by the fans instead of by someone with money who is going to take everything.
You may require you to compromise this vision.
Yeah, but maybe we will at least be able to get a better publishing structure, or we'll be able to find an investor finally that's willing to step up, that isn't necessarily a publisher, and they'll just let us do things how we want.
So to help legitimize this studio and manage the financial side of the business, Jeremy Bloom brings in a corporate consultant and a friend of his father named Keith Warner. Keith joins New World Interactive as its first chief financial officer and gets them into contact with private investors. Unfortunately, on the public side, it seemed like not many fans could see the point in buying what they just saw as a rebrand of this mod that they can already go download for free. And the title, Insurgency 2, maybe alienated people that might not have been aware of the initial mod Insurgency to begin with. In September of 2012, the Kickstarter campaign ends up failing pretty far from its original goal. Early the next year, NWI closes their one and only office, lays off all but about a dozen people, and begins slowing down development. But just a month later, a miracle happens. Steam announces early access. In their words, a unique development model that allows games to be played as they progress towards a full release. Insurgency 2, now just called Insurgency, is one of the first games to go into early access on Steam and generates enough money there to continue development until the game is fully released. NWI projects this game will sell 150,000 copies in its first full year. By the time the game is officially released in January 2014, it had already sold over 200,000, and by 2018, 5 million. But what makes Insurgency so special? Well, to answer that, you'd probably have to On the surface, Insurgency is just like any other multiplayer shooter game, probably most similar to Counter-Strike. There are two opposing forces that are always the same: the security, which you could think of as Western PMCs, and the insurgents, guerrilla-style fighters with a more ragtag arsenal. But upon entering a game, you'll immediately find what sets this game apart. Insurgency focuses on role fulfillment. There is no create a class or loadouts that you tweak before you enter a game. Each role has a specific function, equipped not just with unique weapons, but also with gear tailored to their roles. And unlike some games with a similar system, every position feels useful. No class is overpowered. If you join a game midway and find only the machine gunner slot is available, you can still have a good time if you play that role how it's designed to be played. Every weapon in the game is a viable option to use as long as you use it as intended. There is no unlock system. Outside of the initial class locks for your first few games, you don't have to hit a certain level to unlock a specific weapon or attachment. There is no real progression, which I think is a very positive thing. The game isn't selling you anything to invest in besides the gameplay. If you have that role, you have those weapons. And unlike games like Counter-Strike that employ a more fair system, there is no in-game economy dictating your equipment choices each round based on your performance in the round before it. Every player starts with a fixed number of supply points. These points are used to customize your loadout by grabbing weapons, attachment gear, and armor. It's crucial to use them strategically. You could choose to spend all your points on your rifle if you'd like to, but you might be better off spending a few of those points on armor and a smoke grenade. On the flip side, the game does implement a weight system that impacts your movement and stamina. Every piece of equipment you add is going to add weight, and the heavier your loadout, the slower you're going to move. A heavily armored soldier might be able to take an extra bullet or sustain a little more explosive damage, but they will lag behind when it comes to securing objectives. This is important because in a game that is objective-based, and in a game mode like Push, where your goal is to attack or defend control points that can't be recaptured, or Firefight, where your team will respawn only once you capture an objective, positioning and speed are just as important as your health and weapon choice. Insurgency seems to do the seemingly impossible. It's balanced, asymmetrical gameplay. It's fast-paced, not as fast-paced as a Call of Duty game. Fast-paced moments, they happen in pockets, erupting suddenly and intensely, and then ending almost as quickly as they start. The buttery smooth movement of Insurgency, thanks again to the Source engine, never oversteps into full-on fast-paced gameplay though. Sometimes it feels more like a horror game. You're just waiting around, holding angles, zoning out, waiting for movement. Dying is very easy to do. If you end up being killed, most of the time your screen goes black, and your death holds weight, if not for just draining down your team's respawn waves. The game is hardcore in the most literal sense. One bullet and you're dead.
Good job, Tendies.
Maybe two if you have armor. Headshots, they do what you expect them to do. The gunplay is phenomenal and rewards players who are accurate. Very rarely will you ever find yourself questioning how someone in a close quarters gunfight won over you. You know how. They were quicker to aim and pull the trigger. It's really that simple. One magazine can easily kill 5 or 6 enemies because of this. Speaking of which, you have to try and keep count yourself, because the game doesn't tell you how many bullets you have left. The HUD is very limited, but what it does display is all extremely useful. It does what some other realistic shooters fail to do in allowing you to see your teammates by a small diamond icon on their character, which doesn't take up your entire screen and confuse you, but allows you to decipher more easily who the enemy is, if you're not already well trained at remembering their outfits. The map design is great, and most of the time well balanced, but the real highlight is the sound design. You can hear everything from animal sounds to people talking to radios and what sounds like airstrikes and gunfights going off in the distance. This helps not only immerse you in the game and reminds you that you're fighting in places where people actually live, but also makes you feel like you're part of a larger battle. The game is just pure infantry combat. There are no vehicles, there are no airstrikes or kill streaks, it's just soldiers fighting over objectives. While not running multi-million-dollar competitions, the competitive nature of the game led to full 16-team tournaments run by the Digital Gaming League when the game was at its peak. New World Interactive was very hands-on with the community. They seemed to want the game to do well competitively, and all of this for only $15. But I'm not trying to sell you on a 10-year-old game that was once even given away for free. I'm not trying to get you to re-download a game you haven't touched in 8 years, because while it might be one of the greatest shooter games I've ever played, it's definitely not anymore. Just like Battlefield 3 or whatever Call of Duty game you like the most, the game is only as good as the community around it. And while Insurgency still averages a couple hundred players at any given time, a testament to how well designed the game itself is, you won't find the joy playing it 10 years ago might have given you. And even if you wanted to, it doesn't matter anyway because it doesn't work on Windows 11. The game will blue screen your fucking computer. Playing it now is like going to an abandoned theme park. The rides, if you can manage to get them to start, might still technically work, but nobody's really there to enjoy them with you, and the company that made them doesn't even exist anymore. After the success of Insurgency, NWI would go on to make a game inspired by Day of Defeat. Originally a mod for Insurgency, this game, Day of Infamy, is basically Insurgency in World War II with minor differences. The most notable one being a fire support mechanic that requires a commander and a radio man in the squad to call in fire support. At the same time, the team was also working on the sequel to Insurgency, titled Insurgency Exiles, a game intended to focus on the Nicaraguan Contras and the drug war down in Central America, which I think could have been amazing. The framework of Insurgency would have thrived in a setting like this, and it could have been something really special, but NWI thought the project was a little outside their scope. The sales of Insurgency were starting to slow down, and Day of Infamy didn't really pop off like they had hoped, maybe because it came out the same week as PUBG. NWI needed a way to make money quickly rather than waiting around 4 or 5 years working on a full-blown sequel. So instead of working on a new game, they began porting Insurgency to consoles. One of the limitations of the original game is that it was built on Valve's Source Engine, and Source Engine, as amazing as it can be, doesn't have the ability to be ported to consoles, at least not easily. So NWI begins working with the Unreal Engine. The goal is to make an Unreal Engine version of Insurgency, a clone that could be released on consoles and then also released as a free update to players who already own the game on Steam, which seems like a win-win in all directions. But NWI quickly realized that this too was a lot of work, so they pivoted this Insurgency remake into its own sequel anyway. In 2016, New World Interactive announces Insurgency Sandstorm. It's going to retain that gritty, classic Insurgency feel, but with a new updated engine, and this time with a full-fledged campaign mode, a co-op story mode, console versions, and an updated system that allowed more customization. No longer was it just blanket security or insurgent forces, but customizable characters. The team justified this by pointing out that in the mid-2010s, many conflicts in the Middle East didn't feature clearly uniformed armies. A fighter in jeans and a pink hoodie might be on the same side as someone in full military gear. And most importantly, NWI was going to be working with a publisher this time around, Focus Interactive. They began teasing the game through feature showcases and teaser trailers. The story mode was teased by Andrew Spearin as not being some Michael Bay-like AAA blockbuster, but kind of like an indie film.
When you see gigantic explosions and buildings collapsing and everything, it's like, that's been done, and it's all about the spectacle and not about the story. And in many ways, like, it's being left behind by all these other AAA games. They're just more focused on multiplayer, more focused on that kind of stuff, because like they know that's what sells, and so that's where they invest their money.
At E3 2017, the trailer for Insurgency Sandstorm is released, focusing entirely on the story mode. Insurgency is about to become a mainstream title. You can soon play your favorite PC shooter game with your friends that don't even own a PC. It's gonna have a campaign mode, and to top it off, there were fucking helicopters. But then, on January 3rd, 2018, the lead game designer for Sandstorm, Mikey, makes a community post titled "A Shift in Direction." In it, he announces that both the single-player and cooperative story modes had been cancelled, announces the alpha testing was beginning for the multiplayer, and also prefaced these with the news that Andrew Spearin, the original creator of Insurgency, had moved on to pursue other opportunities. The whole team deeply appreciates his time and contributions to our projects, and we wish him only the best. That's a little weird. Not only was this franchise his idea, but he had been a developer since the start, the creative director on Insurgency, the community manager for NWI, the creative director on Sandstorm, and was the face of the company while promoting Sandstorm. They also sneakily added this announcement in a post with much bigger news that obviously dominated the comments and responses. So, what was really going on? Sandstorm would officially come out on PC in December 2018. The upgrade to Unreal Engine allows the game to look much nicer than the original, but maybe a little bit at the cost of the aesthetics and overall mood. The gunplay is fantastic, feels and sounds incredibly polished, the animations are so good, eventually the lead animator would be yanked up by Infinity Ward to go work on Call of Duty. Competitive players were ready to start running tournaments to try and grow the player base. The game seemed like it was destined to pop off at this point, even as we were still waiting for a console release. When Insurgency came out back in 2014, it was just a few months after Battlefield 4, Call of Duty Ghost, and a few months before Titanfall, all games that are pretty different. There really wasn't anything like it at the time. This time around, you had Battlefield 5 just a month earlier, which I thought was good but wasn't received nearly as well as its predecessors, Call of Duty 15, Black Ops 4, which I can only assume was bad, and Counter-Strike, which was still kind of niche, had really taken off, averaging about 700,000 daily players by the time Sandstorm was released. There was also that group of developers from Project Reality, the old Battlefield mod Insurgency once beat for the Mod of the Year award. They had created their own game called Squad. Squad was slowly growing a fan base. It's a large-scale, semi-realistic tactical shooter that requires you to work with your team to capture objectives, kind of like a more arcadey Arma. What the massive rise of Counter-Strike and games like Rainbow Six Siege showed was that there was a real market for infantry-focused, skill-based shooters, and there wasn't one that had the realistic gunplay and modern military aesthetic that a game like Squad had. Sandstorm could have been that game. They already had that formula with the 2014 game, and they just needed to refine it. But that's not what happened. Sandstorm was going through a little bit of an identity crisis. When Sandstorm initially launched in December, the game was not in a good state. NWI rushed the launch of the game even after being told by beta testers not to. The original game had really active competitive and modding scenes, both of which helped boost the game's popularity and longevity. When it came to Sandstorm, NWI made it clear that they wanted to support a competitive scene directly from launch, which by itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. But when you launch with optimization issues, bugs that allow people to just walk through doors, live stream to thousands of people, theater issues that make actually streaming or reviewing competitive matches incredibly frustrating, and a poor matchmaking system that makes finding competitive matches hard to begin with, it all starts killing the excitement people might have to actually jump into the game. And there was no mod support at all. On top of all of that, outside of the competitive game modes like Firefight, Sandstorm implemented the commander and observer roles initially introduced in Day of Infamy. This slowly shifted Sandstorm from just a shooter game into a war game. There's airstrikes, there's mortars, there's a helicopter gunship with insane aimbot, there's chemical gas, there's drivable vehicles in the game, there are mounted AT guns around the map. The initial 2014 game wasn't perfect. RPGs could wipe out entire teams, spawn camping was rampant. But instead of addressing these issues and fixing them, they've just replaced them with what could be misinterpreted as kill streaks. And because of these vehicles and this innovation. The game was no longer tight, close-quarters combat. At least not really. To compensate for the chopper gunners and the Ford F-150s placed around the map, half the maps have huge wide-open spaces, and they're all much bigger than the source maps. All of these innovations are just morphing the original vision for the game into something more casual, so it can attract more players. That's it. There's not technically an ammo counter, but there's an icon to see how much ammo you have left. You can B-hop or slide boost around, making the game play more like Call of Duty than the original game ever could. This doesn't make Sandstorm a bad game, it just makes it a bad sequel. And it's even more confusing why they chose to go this route, at a time when public sentiment towards the Call of Duty games were increasingly negative, and games like Squad and Escape from Tarkov, which are known for being difficult, were becoming more popular than ever. Less than 2 months after the launch of Sandstorm, Keith Warner, now the president of the company, announces that NWI, currently based out of Denver and Amsterdam, would be expanding, opening up a new office in Calgary, Canada, due to new tax incentives. Locals are just excited to see game development jobs opening up in their area. I would later find out that Andrew Spearin, whose departure was still mysterious, had been pushing for New World to open up an office in Canada for years. The first half of 2019 saw New World Interactive riding on the goodwill they had built up over the Source era. Even with all the optimization issues plaguing the game, leading to the comp scene dying out and no console release on the horizon, people were still willing to give the game a shot. After all, it took years for Insurgency to build up its steady player base, so a rocky start wasn't necessarily a death sentence for Sandstorm, even if it was for the competitive scene. After a series of fixes and content updates, the game was seemingly heading in the right direction, hitting an all-time player peak of 14,000 in June 2019. In July, NWI hires Derek Cherkasky as their head of production. Derek gets to work integrating himself into the community by taking over the update discussions from the lead developer Mikey. Derek also posts these discussions on the Insurgency subreddit, a fan forum not run by any official NWI staff members. Almost immediately, Derek starts crashing out. In September, NWI works with The Escapist, a digital gaming magazine, to produce a 3-part documentary series detailing the creation, success, and future of New World Interactive. It's a good behind-the-scenes look at not just the creation of the Insurgency franchise, but game development overall. However, there is one glaring issue. Andrew Spearin is nowhere in the near 2-hour-long documentary and is only mentioned once. The next month, an ex-NWI employee named Alex posts a trailer to the Insurgency subreddit. The trailer is for a game called Valiant Effort, an upcoming World War II aircraft game. The reason this may have been of interest to the Insurgency community, despite it being a completely different game, is because it was created by the original founder, Andrew Spearin. Derek, the new head of production, takes it upon himself to take down the trailer and issues a warning. We will not be tolerating promoting direct competitors on our subs, period. Then he makes a post of his own, titled Update on Posting Guidelines, where he makes it clear that posting other games is not only not allowed, but says he is going to remove moderator permissions from anybody breaking this new guideline. Immediately, the actual moderators of the Insurgency subreddit come in and defend the posting of the trailer and essentially tell Derek to pipe down. Other NWI employees would come in and try to clean up Derek's mess. Derek has never met or worked with Andrew. This is not a personal attack. Speaking as someone who knew Andrew when he was a contractor for us, we at NWI wish him nothing but the best. They get into a back and forth, with members of the community chiming in to hate on Derek and NWI as a whole, and pointing out that a game focusing on aircraft in World War II should not be seen as a competitor to Insurgency. If we're being generous, Derek had only been at NWI for a few months at this point, and if the documentary is anything to go off of, he may not have even known who Spearin was, so it might not have been malicious. However, it wasn't a good look, and combined with the documentary that came out just a month earlier, the drama had some questioning, why does NWI hate Andrew Spearin so much? At this point, it seems like they're purposely targeting anybody who even mentions him. After this incident, Derek would no longer use Reddit, at least not on this account. That month, Keith Warner also lets the press know that NWI may pull out of Calgary, as they've removed the city's tax incentives. And NWI releases a video basically asking competitive players to rejoin the game, as many had left due to issues they saw never getting fixed. Competitive players had made videos detailing what could be improved, how NWI could improve it. At one point, Link, the founder of the DGL, the third-party competitive platform, had created a 15-page Google Doc dedicated to improving Sandstorm's competitive play. At NWI, it seemed to have just fallen on deaf ears. All hope for a competitive scene at this point was dead. Maybe partly because of this. In March 2020, to make the game more casual than ever, NWI introduces the death cam. Not a kill cam, but a camera that pivots to the person who shot you after you're killed. This abandons so much of what made the original game great. It's way less immersive, but worse than this, it makes it so you're constantly on the move. The death cam is just another band-aid added to compensate for the huge maps and potential exploits the game might have. It, of course, receives a ton of backlash. In response to the backlash, NWI conducts a poll to see what they should do with this new innovation. About half of the votes lean neutral. About a third of the voters wanted it removed, and about 18% wanted it to stay. NWI used these poll numbers to justify keeping the death cam in by arguing that the majority of the player base simply didn't care or wanted it to stay. Jeremy Bloom steps down as CEO and is replaced by his good pal Keith Warner, and in retrospect, I guess all of this makes sense, given what would happen in August of 2020 when it's announced that New World Interactive has been acquired by Saber Interactive, a partner of Focus Entertainment, as part of the Embracer Group, with New World saying they will continue to operate as an independent studio under the Embracer Group Saber Interactive branch, as well as announce they are working on a new, unannounced IP, and thanked everybody for their continued support.
Getting supported by the fans instead of by someone with money who is going to take everything.
You may require to compromise this vision.
Yeah, but
Sandstorm would continue to have its ups and downs, settling into this new playstyle. Eventually, the competitive playlist was removed altogether. The team, now looking for new ways to monetize, would begin experimenting with turning the game into a live service game, continuing to release ever increasingly ridiculous cosmetics, some of which were actually canceled due to fan backlash. Eventually, in March 2021, the lead game designer Mikey would leave the company to go work at Meta, and the game was essentially put in maintenance mode, with all future updates outsourced to an Eastern European studio. The game would come out on PS4 and Xbox One in September, almost 3 years after the initial release date on PC. The entire reason the game was created in the first place was finally here. In December, a user posted the Insurgency subreddit, a comment he got on Steam from the original founder and creative director Andrew Spearin.
Insurgency sold out. More accurately, Keith and Jeremy sold out after dumping me from the team and then proceeding to carry out the business strategies I was lobbying for years. They gaslit me, lied about my departure to the media and to the community I helped build, and drove me out of the documentary because they wanted to control my answers. That's business. At least that's one way to do business that I believe is unethical.
In the comments to this post, one user says the lead developer
Mikey was DMing me and some closed alpha testers to try to get us to change our review from a negative to a positive one. Brought that up with Alex, and he said that's not what the team had discussed. Lots of weird shit going on.
Another user pointed out how Spearant didn't even mention Mikey, even though he was basically the one everyone blamed for the title becoming more casual, as he was the lead developer, suggesting that Mikey might have been the fall guy. When it comes to NWI, and the circumstances that led them to making the decisions they did, and eventually the company shutting down, it's hard to really piece together what happened. Even some of the ex-employees I've talked to are limited in what they're willing to tell me for a variety of reasons, most often legally binding non-disclosure agreements. Nobody's just going to come out and tell you exactly what was going on. Unless, of course, you run into Derek Cherkasky. See, Cherkasky left NWI sometime around 2021, and apparently he had a lot to say about his time there. After leaving the company based out of Calgary, he went to another studio, just down the block, a new startup developer called Quantum Integrity Software. Now, if you don't know who Quantum Integrity is, lucky you, because if you do, that means you probably lost some money. Quantum Integrity, or QI, was started after a very successful crowdfunding campaign for a game called Dead Matter. The entire company was built around this Kickstarter game, and the game itself was a disaster. It was barely playable, and the millions the company raised seemed to have just disappeared. The release of Dead Matter was so bad, it has permanently left a stain on the act of crowdfunding, and it's now looked at as a scam, even if that wasn't the original intention. When I first heard that Derek had gone to work at QI, I was thinking, damn, this guy really can't catch a break. He was basically just switching seats on the Titanic. But then I looked into it, and allegedly, according to multiple former QI employees, Derek might have been a big reason as to why that game failed the way it did. Now, there's other videos you can go watch on that if you're interested. I only bring it up to highlight that Derek is quite the character, so you should probably take his comments with a grain of salt, even though I do think they help paint a picture of what was going on at New World. On Derek's personal Reddit account, that even the horrible Google AI overview identifies as Derek, he responded to a question posted on the Calgary subreddit, which local company would you never accept a job offer from? His answer, New World Interactive. Derek has made multiple comments about an unnamed company he worked at that I'm pretty sure point to New World Interactive. The overarching theme of these comments all revolve around a CEO who doesn't care about video games.
I didn't know very much about the video game industry. I come from an era when video games were, stand-up boxes. It was never something that I was big into.
Selling out the company and running it into the ground.
Helped to build an incredibly potent company that attracted investors and suitors from across the space. We ended up selling to one of these companies a mere year after we had less than 6 months in the bank. It was the turnaround story of the year for our area. Fast forward 12 months later, around half of the original company had resigned. The creative director was recently unceremoniously fired for his piss-poor performance. The CEO hung him out to dry to save his own neck. He got up and lied to everyone, saying he had no idea this happened, and also, no one ever told me about this. The company I worked at was bought, and the CEO royally fucked everyone in the process. He stole the bonus pool for himself and offered everyone else in the company a fraction of the pool that he stole. Said CEO referenced above 100% does not care, doesn't live in the same country as the business, doesn't even know 2/3 of the company because he had never met them, doesn't have any skills relevant to the company, etc. His continued presence is destroying so many people's lives. I resigned, and since then so have many others. The guy doesn't know what he's doing, doesn't care, and is actively destructive to what is best for the company, the people, the product, and the retention of staff.
In June 2023, the Embracer Group announced that they would be restructuring due to a failed $2 billion investment from the Saudis. This news sent shockwaves through the gaming industry, and many predicted this may lead to layoffs at New World, as well as many other Saber Interactive subsidiaries under the Embracer umbrella. In September, Keith Warner steps down as CEO, and just 2 months later, it's reported that NWI has been shut down by Embracer Group, largely due to that failed Saudi deal. This is what most believe to be the conclusion to the Insurgency franchise, with many in the gaming community rightfully blaming the Embracer Group. Still, 2 years later, I see it repeated every time someone asks for a new game. As I would come to find out, that's not the whole picture. In fact, a lot of what people believe about NWI just isn't true. Starting with the founding of the company. NWI wasn't founded in 2010 by Jeremy Bloom and Andrew Spearin like Wikipedia states. The company was originally founded in 2007, around the time the original mod was released, in the state of Delaware. The company was then shut down and later reincorporated in the state of Colorado around 2010 by Bloom with some weird situation going on. Spearin's name is nowhere found on this official paperwork. Additionally, the trademark for Insurgency was owned by Bloom himself up until 2015, over a year after the initial game was launched, when it was then transferred to NWI. An Embracer Group release from 2020 also lists Jeremy as the sole founder of NWI. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that internally Spearin wasn't an owner, but given that he's referred to as a contractor by official NWI employees and still seems to hold a grudge against the company, I'm willing to bet that Spearin had little stake in the company, if any at all. The company that was largely built off of his ideas. Speaking to his departure, I have heard that the official reason he was essentially forced to resign was because he wouldn't move to Colorado. NWI allegedly wanted him to move to Colorado for some tax incentives. To add insult to injury, this was just over a year before the company would open up that Calgary office in Spearin's home country because of tax incentives. Now, of course, there was probably a lot more going on behind the scenes, but I do find it tragic that if what I've heard is true, Jeremy Bloom, who was once allegedly kicked off the Red Orchestra team, a project he started, would allow the same thing to happen to his co-founder Spearin, simply because Spearin didn't have any real ownership. In March 2024, Embracer Group announces they will be selling Saber Interactive to Beacon Interactive, a company owned by Saber CEO Matt Karsh. This deal includes NWI. Matt Karsh was also the COO of Embracer Group during the Saudi deal fiasco. In fact, in an interview given in December 2024, Matt Karsh reveals that he was the mastermind behind that failed Saudi deal. The deal was initially much smaller and just focused on Saber Interactive properties. It then ballooned in size to encompass the entire Embracer Group, which led to it not going through. He was ultimately the reason. He also says in that interview that
after the split, Saber did conduct a host of layoffs at New World Interactive due to issues with the game they were making, but said they didn't shut studios down or do mass cuts. And in a follow-up, Karsh said Saber is working on a new AAA game with NWI.
In the initial Kickstarter campaign for Insurgency, Bloom described Insurgency's style of gameplay as high-speed tactical, hoping it would inspire other games to embrace this hybrid approach. Even though this game is now 11 years old, I still don't think any other game has really embraced this style. It's a balance that's hard to replicate. Tactical shooters like this are already risky to begin with. You lean too heavy on the tactical side, you're going to ostracize your more casual fans. You become too casual, you ostracize your competitive or milsim audience. It's a game only an indie developer could have made. Large gaming companies aren't going to risk making a game for an audience that historically loathes goofy cosmetics and battle passes. Insurgency was lightning in a bottle. At one time, IGN even said this game could compete with Counter-Strike. It's a shame that NWI at this point is basically just a zombie company. Any game developed by them now would just be using the brand without any of the people that built it. Any future release under Saber Interactive using the Insurgency IP would most likely be the most casual yet, while games like Arma Reforger are doing better than Sandstorm ever was. Sandstorm isn't a bad game, but it's not nearly as good as it could have been, and it was just successful enough to kill off any real potential that this franchise had.